In August of 1994, a front door in Reno, Nevada sat unlocked. Inside, a television was left blaring to an empty living room. A wallet and a set of keys were sitting on the kitchen table. Everything looked like the woman who lived there had just stepped out to grab the mail, but she was gone. 6 months later, it happened again. Another ordinary apartment, another reliable woman vanishing straight out of her own bed. When homicide detectives walked into these quiet crime scenes, they noticed something strange. There were no scratched door frames, no shattered windows. The physical evidence pointed to a single conclusion. Both women had invited the person standing on the front porch inside. Today, we look at the case of David Stephen Middleton. Analyze the evidence with us, check the facts, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Before we look at the evidence folder, please take a quick second to hit the subscribe button. It helps us keep telling these stories, ensuring every name in these files is remembered. The investigation started with silence in 2 different parts of Reno, Nevada. Homicide detectives didn't have a trail of broken glass or blood to follow. They had empty rooms and a sequence of unanswered phone calls. The first track opened on August 8, 1994. Thelma Davila was 42 years old. She was a casino employee who had moved to Reno from Guatemala to build a stable life. She lived by a strict routine, rarely missing a shift since her hire in 1988, or leaving her apartment untidy. She maintained constant contact with her younger sister who lived nearby. Because Thelma did not own a car and could not drive, her entire world relied on local transit, walking, and predictable schedules. If she was even 10 minutes late for a family gathering, people noticed. On that summer afternoon, her routine stopped. Thelma did not show up for her regular shift at Circus, which immediately prompted concern from her supervisors. When her younger sister went over to check on her apartment, she found the front door unlocked. Inside, the scene defied logic. Thelma's purse, her money, and her personal identification were sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. The television was still running, casting a flickering light against the empty walls. A plate of food had been left out. Detectives searched the apartment for signs of a struggle. They found no overturned chairs, no torn clothing, and no signs of forced entry. It appeared she had vanished while going about her normal afternoon. This complete lack of physical evidence brought the initial phase of the case to a total standstill. For 6 months, local detectives ran into dead ends. They interviewed neighbors, spoke with casino employees, and checked taxi routing slips to see if she had taken an unrecorded ride. There were no witnesses and no leads. Thelma's folder sat on a desk, frozen, while her family waited for updates. Homicide teams were forced to wait for a break in the case. Then, in February of 1995, that break arrived in the worst way possible. The second track opened. Catherine Powell was 45 years old. She held a PhD in psychology and spent her days teaching a class of 3rd-grade students. Like Thelma, Catherine was highly reliable and kept a strict schedule. When she failed to show up for a weekend ski trip with her friends, those close to her contacted the police. Her co-workers drove over to her apartment complex. They walked up the stairs, knocked on the door, and received no answer. The silence from inside made them uneasy. When 2 school employees leaned over the balcony rail and looked through the bedroom window, they saw what appeared to be a foot on an unmade, rumpled bed, prompting an immediate 911 call. When police arrived and entered the home, they hit the exact same situation they encountered in Thelma's case. There were no pry marks on the front door. The windows were intact. Whoever had entered Catherine's home had been let inside. There was no chaos or physical mess. Detectives were standing in a pristine apartment, dealing with 2 cautious, highly responsible women who lived in separate neighborhoods. Yet, both women had turned their deadbolts in the middle of the day for a stranger. The question confronting the police was simple. Who could command that much automatic trust? To understand how this happened, investigators had to look at a file from thousands of miles away, inside the Internal Affairs Department of the Miami-Dade Police Force in Florida. They needed to discover who this man was before he arrived in Nevada. David Stephen Middleton joined the Miami Metro-Dade Police Department in January of 1982. In his first year, he earned a series of commendations and was promoted to detective in the Warrants Bureau. To the citizens on his beat, his dark uniform, service weapon, and marked patrol cruiser represented absolute safety and authority. He knew exactly how the public responded to a badge. But behind closed doors, Middleton was living a double life. By March of 1988, Internal Affairs removed him from the warrants section and placed him on station duty during an active investigation for assisting criminals, resulting in a suspension. Internal files also showed he was involved in Santeria practices, acting as a priest and utilizing altars and rituals to establish psychological control over people in his personal life. Far more dangerous, however, was how he utilized his official position on the force. Middleton understood that authority creates instant trust. If he turned on his police cruiser's flashing lights, people pulled over without question. If he knocked on a door in his uniform, people opened it. He realized that a uniform completely bypasses a person's normal defense mechanisms. In November of 1989, Middleton was arrested for kidnapping and sexual assault. Less than a year later, in September of 1990, while off-duty but still wearing his full police uniform, he picked up a 16-year-old girl on a Miami street, claiming she had violated curfew. He handcuffed her, stated he was taking her to a juvenile correctional facility, and instead drove her to an empty lot outside of town where he assaulted her. Following an internal affairs investigation, Middleton resigned from the Miami Metro-Dade Police Department in December of 1990. He was convicted of false imprisonment and battery, receiving a 5-year prison sentence. This conviction meant his name and fingerprints were permanently logged into national law enforcement databases as a violent offender. He served 2 years of that sentence before being paroled in 1993, at which point he moved out of Florida. When Middleton arrived in Reno, Nevada, corporate background checks failed to flag his past. He applied for a job at TCI Cable, a major utility provider in the area. Because of a gap in corporate screening and a lack of verification of out-of-state felony records, his history was completely overlooked. No one cross-referenced his name with the Florida Department of Corrections. Within weeks, Middleton was issued a corporate uniform, an official identification card, and a company truck. Within months, he was another technician residents had little reason to question. The system had provided a new disguise and a legitimate reason to knock on any door in the city. With a company clipboard in his hand, Middleton's presence on residential property became entirely legal. He did not have to stalk women or hide in the shadows. He received daily corporate work orders that sent him straight to their addresses. In the 1990s, cable technicians arrived at regional dispatch offices early each morning to collect a physical stack of printed routing sheets. These work orders identified service addresses and scheduled appointment windows, giving him legitimate access to customers' homes. Company records would later show he had visited both victims before they disappeared. Weeks before Thelma Davila disappeared, Middleton was the technician assigned to her apartment for a routine cable installation. Weeks before Catherine Powell vanished, his name was stamped on the service log for her home. Investigators believed those service visits gave Middleton the opportunity to observe apartment layouts, identify security features, and determine which residents lived alone. While executing standard utility upgrades or testing signal reception at the wall jacks, he had a full physical view of the entry points, structural blind spots, and deadbolt placement inside the main rooms. He could look at the window locks and the hallway layout without raising suspicion. But Middleton also knew that a man in a work uniform knocking on a single woman's door could still trigger a resident's survival instincts. To manage this, he introduced another element to his deceptions: his live-in girlfriend, Yvonne Haley. When Middleton drove his red company pickup truck out on his routes, Yvonne frequently sat in the passenger seat next to him. The vehicle was a 1972 International Harvester utility truck, often loaded up with random household tools and equipment. To any neighbor watching from a window, or any victim looking through a peephole, the sight of a man and a woman working together removed any sense of danger. It appeared to be a routine utility team coming to service the television lines. It looked entirely domestic and safe. Because the residents trusted the uniform and the setup, they turned the deadbolt, stepped back, and let him inside. On February 11, 1995, the mystery transitioned from a missing persons search to a homicide operation. A maintenance worker walking past a commercial trash dumpster at a Reno apartment complex noticed a heavy package dumped inside. When police arrived and opened the layers, they found the body of Catherine Powell, bound and wrapped in a sleeping bag. Homicide detectives immediately began pulling the utility routing logs for her apartment complex, and Middleton's name was flagged almost instantly. Reno Police Detective Stephen Reed determined that Middleton was the specific TCI cable technician who had made a service call at Powell's home on January 28, 1995. He was the last utility worker to have documented contact with her home. On February 23, 1995, Detective David Jenkins called Middleton and asked him to come down to the police station for an interview. Middleton arrived calm. He sat down, adjusted his clothes, and assumed his experience as a former officer would allow him to navigate the conversation. He admitted that he had made a service call to Powell's home and acknowledged that he owned the red International Harvester pickup truck investigators were tracking. Detective Jenkins began asking standard, open-ended questions about his daily cable routes and the neighborhoods he visited. He kept his tone casual, withholding any details about the crime scene. He had not announced to the public or to Middleton that Catherine Powell had been killed. Jenkins asked Middleton if he had shopped at commercial hardware recently, or if he had purchased any specific brands of commercial trash bags. He wanted to see if Middleton would link himself to the materials found at the dumpster. Middleton was equivocal, stating that if he was on store video, then he must have been there, but he claimed he was unsure of what items he bought. As the line of questioning continued, Middleton grew visibly agitated. The routine nature of the questions was clearly wearing on him. He leaned forward, looked straight at the investigator, and said, "It seems like you're trying to tie me to her murder." Detective Jenkins paused. No one in the interview room had mentioned murder. Middleton had just revealed information detectives had never shared publicly. The slip-up changed the entire direction of the case. Realizing his mistake, Middleton immediately shut down the conversation. Detective Jenkins asked point-blank if Middleton rented a storage unit anywhere in the area, and Middleton said no. He then stood up, stated that he wanted to leave, and walked out of the station. Because they did not have enough physical evidence for an arrest warrant at that exact moment, the detectives had to let him leave. But the moment Middleton walked out the front door, the strategy shifted to physical surveillance. A team of unmarked police cars locked onto his red utility truck. They began a 24-hour surveillance operation, tracking his vehicle through the streets of Reno to ensure he didn't try to destroy evidence or flee the state. On March 4, 1995, that surveillance paid off. An anonymous caller phoned the station and informed police that Middleton and Yvonne Haley had been seen at a local commercial storage facility. Detectives rushed to the location and discovered a unit had been opened under a completely fictitious name, but Middleton's truck had been spotted nearby. Detectives obtained an emergency search warrant, preparing to raid the unit the following morning. On March 5, 1995, police executed the search warrant on the hidden storage unit, and forensic teams immediately began processing the space. They photographed, measured, and tagged every item in real time. Instead of looking for a single piece of evidence, they had to systematically document a room that had been completely modified. The centerpiece of the room was a household refrigerator lying flat on the concrete floor. Middleton had structurally altered the entire appliance. He had gutted all the internal plastic shelving, cut out the floor of the freezer compartment to merge the appliance into one long vertical chamber, and drilled rows of small air holes through the thick metal walls. The forensic team processed the interior of the refrigerator under specialized lighting. Inside the dark, modified chamber, they lifted microscopic blue-green wool fibers from the inner lining. These fibers were carefully bagged and tagged for lab analysis. Later, tests would prove they matched the fibers found on Catherine Powell's clothing, physically linking her to the inside of that appliance. Moving deeper into the unit, investigators found a custom-built wooden speaker box attached to a heavy pulley system hanging from the ceiling rafters. The box dimensions measured roughly 30 inches wide and 36 inches high, and it featured a hidden space behind the speaker cone about 14 inches deep. When they disassembled the wood panels, they uncovered a dark cavity, revealing strands of human hair trapped in the corners. The deeper investigators searched, the more the storage unit appeared less like a warehouse and more like a carefully organized crime scene. Forensic technicians turned their attention to a nearby workbench, cataloging a collection of tools and equipment scattered across the tables. This inventory included a switchblade knife, a stun gun, orange-handled tension clamps, black canvas utility belts with Velcro closures, black industrial wire ties, handcuffs, condoms, and partial rolls of heavy duct tape. Every item was assigned an evidence tracking number and logged into the chain of custody records to be tested for DNA and fingerprints. Stored alongside these tools was Catherine Powell's missing personal property, which Middleton had cleared out of her apartment. Investigators pulled her home and car keys, her personal camera, her computer, her printer, and her legal documents directly out of the unit. Near the back of the locker, a forensic specialist recovered a dense foam ball gag. They placed it under a bright light for documentation. The hard foam surface revealed deep human teeth marks pressed permanently into the material, showing where a victim had bitten down. Every item was placed into evidence bags, creating a physical record of what had occurred inside that unit. This completed the field search, allowing prosecutors to build the formal criminal case. At trial, the prosecution presented the evidence to the jury as a narrative built on physical science. They didn't rely on theories. They let the items recovered from the storage unit connect the suspect directly to the victims. Prosecutors began with something deceptively ordinary, a yellow commercial storage bag. When Catherine Powell's body was found, her outer layer was encased in this specific bag, labeled Warp's Banana Bag. Detectives canvassed the city and proved these bags were sold at only one location, Commercial Hardware in downtown Reno. They introduced the store's sales records and surveillance footage, proving that during the exact window of Catherine's disappearance, Middleton stood at the counter and purchased that exact box of bags. When investigators matched the boxes found in his storage unit, they discovered one of the 3 yellow bags was missing from the set. Next, the prosecution introduced the fiber matches to prove where Catherine had been held. FBI forensic experts took the stand to present the microscopic evidence. They testified that the rare blue-green wool fibers pulled from the gutted refrigerator in the storage unit were an exact match to the clothing Catherine wore when she vanished. The fibers placed the victim directly inside the modified appliance. The physical evidence then shifted to the dental analysis to establish direct physical contact. Pursuant to a court seizure order, police had obtained a mold of Middleton's teeth to compare to the marks found on Powell's body. The forensic odontologists testified that the bite pattern on the victim's body was consistent with Middleton's dental molds. The prosecution then tied the case back to their first missing person, Thelma Davila, proving this was a continuous pattern. While Middleton was under arrest, her remains were discovered in a rural area near Verde, Nevada. A dental bridge in the skull led to the official identification of her body. Dr. Frederick Laubscher performed the medical examination of the remains. Although the advanced passage of time left the remains highly incomplete, preventing the doctor from declaring an exact cause of death, the state introduced massive circumstantial and physical data linking her to Middleton's storage facility. Witnesses took the stand and testified to seeing Davila with Middleton and Haley shortly before her track stopped, and multiple neighbors placed his red pickup truck directly outside her home on the morning she vanished. Furthermore, hair matching Davila's profile was recovered from a roll of duct tape seized directly from his storage unit. The forensics had tied both missing women to the exact same locker. To bring the trial to a climax, the prosecution called his live-in girlfriend, Yvonne Haley, to the witness stand to uncover how the deception was maintained on the road. The courtroom waited for her testimony, but Yvonne refused to answer the questions. She invoked her Fifth Amendment rights over and over again, leaving the courtroom in total silence. But the prosecution did not need her words. The receipts, the fibers, the hair, and the dental matches had already completed the story. The jury reached its verdict swiftly, deliberating for only a few hours. In September of 1997, David Stephen Middleton was found guilty of first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, grand larceny, fraudulent use of a credit card, and being an ex-felon in possession of a firearm. The jury sentenced Middleton to death for each murder count. He remains behind bars, sitting on death row at Ely State Prison in Nevada, where his continuous post-conviction habeas petitions and legal appeals have been systematically denied by the Supreme Court of Nevada. When the case was closed, it left behind a lesson about security. We spend thousands reinforcing our homes with cameras, alarms, and heavy locks. We think a lock can keep us safe from the world. Yet this case shows that even the strongest lock becomes meaningless once the wrong person is invited inside. The greatest failure wasn't the lock, it was the system that handed a trusted uniform to a dangerous man. It is a reminder that a lock is only as safe as the gatekeeper. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this file. If this story touched you, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive. Every name in these folders deserves to be remembered. See you in the next case.